Welcome back, everybody. This week on the podcast, we've got my buddy Bryan Raymond on the show. He's talking about his journey with rheumatoid arthritis and how he's bringing healing into the world. It's an awesome conversation that we have, and I'm pumped for you to hear it. So with that, let's get weird. All right, welcome back to the Weird and Strong podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Gernsteiner, and today I'm with my great friend, Bryan. He is hailing to us from the Pacific Northwest, and I'm so excited to see him again on screen. It's been, we're coming up on a month since we've seen each other in person already. Time is flying by. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeremy. Happy to be here, man. Excited.
Yeah, I got one quick question for you before we get this is the freebie question. We're going to start off with.
I got to pay for the rest?
You got to pay for the rest. Yeah. Got to get that first taste. And we're going to start with a little weird question. So get your weird hat on. If you take enough open-faced sandwiches and pile them all up, does that qualify as nachos?
Open-faced sandwiches. Are you stacking them like bread to bread kind of? So
no, just like just a pile of them.
Just a pile, just throwing like from across the room, throwing piles of open.
Yeah, like on a platter, you stack them all up on a mound. Does that qualify as nachos?
If it's soft bread, I don't think so. So now, if we're getting it like toasted, we might be getting a little close.
So you've never had soggy nachos before?
Good point, but who wants soggy nachos?
But does that disqualify them as nachos because they're soggy?
Does it disqualify them as nachos, or does it become disqualified because you absolutely lose interest?
Questions to be asked.
Good stuff.
So in general, yay or nay?
I'm going to go with no. I'm going to go with no.
Okay. Cool deal. Awesome. Thanks for playing along with the goofy stuff that I like to come up with. Yeah, let's get right into you. The easy segue into this, because we are the Weird and Strong podcast, is what about you is somewhat outside of the norms of your peers, society? What ways are you unconventional? What's the weird stuff you like to do?
Wow. Great question. And Weird and Strong, you would expect something like this from Jeremy. So,
you could start with a little bit of background going into this.
Yeah. Perfect. Because that's where it leads me, is growing up in Southern California in the 80s, great time to be with skateboarding and other lifestyles and X Games coming up. So it was a very explosive time, which was an easy answer when I was turning 18, 19 and looking at opening and getting into piercing and opening my first professional studio at the age of 21. Mm-hmm. At the time, I know piercing is weird, like pretty normal nowadays.
Yeah.
But 1994, that was not so common. It was definitely the different. It was outcast. Tattoos were. That lifestyle was definitely not the norm. Going into break-in, rave, pre-rave culture, another alternative sect that was, making its way on the scene. And we fast forward to today, I would say most people respond to the fact that I've gone from a place of having all of that joy to being diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, living with that for almost 30 years now. And through all those storms that I've weathered, to be here with you today and able-bodied and having my rheumatologist asking me what I'm doing is amazing to me. And what the takeaway for me on that is what makes that a little different is there was some part in me that just didn't give up and didn't accept what boxes, what limitations, what other people said was possible.
Yeah.
I believe that's possible for everybody. So it's still not very strange to me. It's just it's been reflected to me that it's a different level of self-commitment, a different level of dedication.
Yeah. What do you, well, like, let's put it into the hypothetical. What do you think your life would have been like if you had taken this diagnosis and used that to define you going forward? What would have your life
Well,
looked like?
well, for a long time, it's not hard to imagine. For a long time, medicines didn't work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Nothing conventional. Doctors, basically, when I got my diagnosis, it was kind of shocking. Because right off the bat, it was very casual. Oh, blood work says you got this, and there you go.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 23 years old. I don't know what that means. Like
Yeah.
I'm healthy. What's up? Uh, well, you're going to, there's no cure. Of course, that's always the answer, right? We can't cure this. All we can do is manage it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll keep just trying medications and we'll take care of that. And as young as you are, yeah, it's a good possibility you'll be in a wheelchair by your 50 or severely on the way to that or having severe disabilities. And for a lot of years, I went down other roads of like massage work, energy work, started branching out because modern medicine was already telling me it was doing everything it could.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't working because I was starting to lose my ability to work. I was starting to lose my ability to be out in the world because I was starting to be in pain all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it got really dark for a long time and many years. And thankfully, that's not the case. And there was that small part of me that did keep going, even though other parts of me definitely didn't want to continue at times. I just wanted to resign to that diagnosis and check out and just be like, this is all I know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that's about as best I can put it for that. It's a very strange place to be internally and describe where that is for somebody who just is battling like borderline checking out of life and still dedicated and hopeful for the best.
Was there a particular moment for you where you can remember where you made that clear distinction between those two paths? Or was it like an organic growth into that?
As far as tying that to a path, there was a lot of years where the side that didn't want to be here, the side that was just wanting this to be fixed and stop hurting and to return to something that just resembled not hurting. That was about as far out as I could think in that part of me. And it was a loud part. The hopeful part was really small. And for somehow that one just kept hanging on with enough force, even as small as it was. It kept pulling me forward through some of those times. What really turned the corner was getting introduced to work that, like I said, I've been down a lot of rabbit holes, but finding work that actually really started redirecting my attention and energy more to myself and started working more about my perspective on how I was living life and where I was coming from, which was a weird concept for me at the time. It's a very different thing to start thinking in life that way. If I look back to how I was at that time going into discovering this work.
Sure. And are you
Does that
talking
answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're talking about this work, is this specifically the TRE or is it a combination of things?
It's been a combination. It's been
Sure.
a relatively short journey. I mean, 2 years is really not that much of a time period, although it feels like it's been a lot longer.
Yeah. I mean, 2 years in the grand scheme of things versus, the entirety of a lifetime, and also can feel like an eternity.
Yeah. And I believe, and I'm starting to understand this, I believe now is the healthier and better I'm getting as life is really starting to move past the healing phase and back into like, what can I do now that I'm not focused or dealing with that? That 2 years is so long because that life is so far back. It just is such a dramatic change in that 2 years that it seems like a lifetime ago that I was living in that place of pain.
Yeah.
Where this was even not even a dream in my possibility.
Sure. Like I know a little since we know each other, I know a bit about this. But for the benefit of everybody else listening, do you mind further illustrating that difference between, the start of that healing journey of what did your day to day look like? Like what was
like before I got into this or when I started the journey?
Before, right as you got started, what was that baseline for you 2 years ago?
And yeah, to answer your question, I realized I didn't really finish up. It's been a lot of combination of things that have kind
Sure.
of put this together, but they all work towards the same goal, I believe,
Hmm.
and support
Totally.
in the same in a different way. So I'll take you back a little farther than 2 years. I'll take you back 7 or 8 when medication really wasn't in my life at all, and I was functioning day to day.
Mhm.
I had days where it was get up, go from the bed to the couch. That's what we're going to do. We're going to prop ourselves up with pillows. We're going to try to find some way to ease the stress on the joints
Mhm.
so the body can relax as best it can. Um, in my darkest of days, it was hard to sleep for more than an hour or two at a time unless I was propped up properly. And even then, it wasn't solid sleep. It was just the body was tired enough for me to kind of shut off to check out.
Mhm.
It got difficult to shower. It got difficult to do self care. Challenging to walk. Couldn't make a fist. Wasn't able to work. Ended up selling my business because I wasn't able to be there or do that kind of work anymore.
Mhm.
Luckily, I ended up having a relationship that I was able to get back on insurance. And I did find some medication that was starting to work. So I will give credit where credit is due. Medication and that part of my aspect, something worked well enough to give me a little bit of relief so I could start to actually exist back in my body and
Mhm.
figure things out. And that led to more discovery um, of the work that helped change, which, there's no accidents in life, right? We're talking
Mhm.
synchronicity. I
Yeah.
saw somebody else spouting how they felt better in their life and things that were changed, and saw that a few times and got very curious for some reason. So I reached out. They eventually pointed me to somebody that began a journey that started changing everything for me.
Mhm.
And I'll give credit where credit's due. Training Camp for the Soul
Yeah.
is was the right medicine at the right time, and it still is working wonders in my life.
Mhm.
And that work is all about starting to show up for yourself.
Mhm.
And I will say, for the biggest thing for me, because I can go down this road for a long time, it's been very impactful.
Yeah.
But the biggest turning point for me was I showed up. I actually found somebody who was able to offer support. Because up until this point, I've been doing a lot of it on my own and felt it's the hard thing to do when you're on your own and you're suffering and pain. I'm sure there's people out there that know what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
But that support didn't offer advice, didn't offer anything but a nice space for me to show up and actually express and get to understand or experience what I've been holding in. And the more I was able to sit ultimately with myself, all the stuff I've been holding in, all the stuff that I've been holding on to try to get through and manage this life that hurt so bad started to come out. And we started to find ways to actually, I got supported in learning how to be with that.
Mhm.
And I had a lot of experience before this, so there's a lot of other tools that I bring up and tie into this, but we start getting into supporting yourself with the very weird concept of safety.
Mhm. What did
I
that,
don't know. Yeah, that's a big
like,
concept, right? It's hard to
yeah,
just throw
totally.
out there lightly.
Yeah, like, if you don't mind, like, so talking about this aspect of the journey and training camp for the soul, if you wouldn't mind, give a little background on, like, what is that program like? What was that like for you? There's some of the folks that'll be listening that are very familiar with it, and some folks that aren't at all. So, your experience, your perspective of, like, what was that journey like for you? What did it, a little more specific of what did that help you with beyond the safety?
Yeah. Ultimately, I would say prior to finding Training Camp for the Soul, there was a lot of energy and focus spent looking out in the world and looking for the right tool, the right modality, the right program, diet,
Mm-hmm.
medication, uh, energy work. There's something out there that's going to assist me. Um, and it was just constantly looking to manage a life.
Mm-hmm.
What Training Camp did was, as I said, it started giving me a place to express what was in. But in that expression, the safety I'm talking about was there was no judgment. There was just acceptance
Mm-hmm.
And that was the next big key for me, is as other people were actually starting to allow a space that they accepted me,
Mm-hmm.
I got to see where I wasn't accepting myself. It became very obvious that I was the one showing up with this judgment about what I was bringing.
Yeah.
And that is over and over and over again in each way, in so many ways, of bringing some awareness to a space that you can actually bring it up and sit with it, learn to be with it, to feel it, to let it have its expression, and be with the walls perhaps that I've built up
Mm-hmm.
in between being with that, where example, just hurting all the time, take this pain away. This pain was very separate. It was something to be fixed, to be gotten rid of. And when it was, the more I got to experience what safety was like, showing up to a group or having that support of someone that was able to just let me be me, the more that space grew, the more I was able to sit with what came up. Oh, this really hurts. I just wish this would stop, and
Mm-hmm.
allow the energy of that expression, even, and the feeling that it would come up with that, to realize like there was a lot going on that I previously had rushed through to mask over in the hopes of just not dealing with it.
Yeah.
Didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
It was just pain. So over and over again, that just kept unfolding more and more and more. And ultimately what happened was, instead of turning my attention out there looking for something else to happen and something else that I could do, I started being able to just look with myself and be with me and start to understand how I had come to hold this life together.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is like the beliefs I have that I believe are true, that life is going to be hard. I have to have the right answers and figure everything out. These things started to come up,
Mm-hmm.
and where they were never visible before, and I would have never understood how important and how much learning to relate to yourself and having a relationship with yourself is really the key to the relating to everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what training camp did for me. It readjusted and helped me see a relationship with myself and made a new relationship with me possible. And in that, a new life started to become possible.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I found a lot of tools along the way. I started combining a lot of things that go with that to get something that works for me. It's very natural and personal.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that struck me right away as you were talking about this is that, this is something we discussed at the men's retreat that we attended together in a bit of a way of, we were talking about Chris's sovereignty codes. Is you in that phase where you look externally for all of the answers. Just tell me how to not hurt. Give me the answer. Give me the answer. Give it, like, whoever's got it, I'll sign up for it.
Yep.
And the reflection then coming through onto this journey is that most of the answers, magic was in you the whole time. To be cliched and whatnot. Does that sum it up?
It's,
in a very,
it's
very,
so true.
yeah.
And it is so cliche. And I sit in the back of my head that comes almost out so much when people want to talk. And I resist sharing that, because I know that I feel that if somebody said that to me, I shut off.
Oh yeah.
It's the, the fairy tale little thing, like, all the magic's within you. You already know all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the magic of life and the universe. It actually gave you a system that wants to right itself, that wants to exist in health and its utmost ability.
Mm-hmm.
It's constantly searching for that. And I will say that's that voice that was calling me forward. It's that natural innate desire. It's just, we get in the way.
Yeah, absolutely is. I look back for myself because, I have my experience with my coaching style and my coaching clients where I say things like that many times. Of like, well, they'll say that they don't know. I'll ask them a question. Like, well, what do you think about this? Well, I don't know. It's like, well, you do know. Just take the second. Take the time to feel it, experience it, get curious about it. And that same thing of the magic being in you the whole time. Like if 5 years ago, Jeremy could hear me today when I talk about these things or when I coach people on their mindset or their stories or their language, there very much be, I'm assuming what you were describing of that, like, what kind of wooey bullshit are they pulling on me? Like, this sounds like a scam, or this sounds like something that doesn't apply to me. Like, I'm looking for the clear cut scientific, if this then that type of solution, the very logical side of things. Does that resonate for you from your past as well?
It does a little bit. There's definitely a part of me that loves to figure things out and wants to think I'm smart and use that brain. It's paid off at times in the past. And it likes doing the job. It really does. You give it something, even if you give it a little morsel, right? It wants to run all day. I consider myself fortunate because I was at such a bleak spot that there was so much in me. It didn't take much but attending a free call with them, and stuff just started pouring out. And it was very clear to me from that first moment. It's like, this is a path for you. It let me calm my system down in a way that I hadn't experienced just by being on the call and experiencing what other people were going through. So I'm very fortunate that, one, I was in a dark spot that I didn't feel like I had much in the way of choices. There was either exist this way in absolute suffering and screaming for it to be better, and life getting worse all the time. We can definitely go down some dark, stormy nights. And like I said, there was something that organically just reached in and touched whatever was already overflowing in me. That was just like, here's the release to that valve. Let's let it go. And it was very clear, like, okay, there's something there. Let's show up and do it again. Same thing the second time. Okay, this is a financial investment for me at the time. Yeah. And what's more important than working with yourself? And you asked, right? I've been asking for years to something, and it wasn't going to be something that was going to stand in the way. But I think you brought up something really interesting a minute ago with that, I don't know. Do you mind if I circle back to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think that it really highlighted what we're talking about, the way our beliefs about life and what we do to be what we believe to be true. And that statement alone is a very interesting one, right? Because you just brought up something like clients, and I've seen this with a lot of clients as well. I don't know. I know I've seen myself do this. I don't know. And it takes no pause between the continuing sentence of starting down, say something. Like, okay, you didn't know, but you also had a lot to say.
Yeah. So, it's just like it's a filler, or it's a, one of the things that I experience with that especially is one of the things that I've noticed on my own journey and with coaching, with my own personal development, is that especially as Americans, we look to rush to the end. We look to rush to the outcome. And when we're talking about something where we're in the middle of a process, especially if we're being asked on how we feel in the middle of the process, we're like, well, I'm not done yet, so how would I know? It's like, well, that's not the point, first of all. And also, we have such a disconnect from the logical, intelligent centers of our brain and how we actually feel and experience things, physically and emotionally. And when we get to that space of, I get asked a question and I go, I don't know. Usually I'm ignoring all of those things. Because we think about, like, this is soapbox time apparently for Jeremy, is you think about like our lives as Americans. We start to attend public schools where we are sat at a desk or we're sat at a table, whatever that looks like. And when you have feelings and sensations, it's very likely, that's not the time for this. Stuff that down, deal with it later. And then we go into our work lives and it's a continuation of that same. So we see this big disconnect of the thought processing and the thinking and the actual feeling of it. And when we get into that space, we're just reliving that same pattern over and over again. It's like, well, I don't know. It's like, you do. Just take a second. allow it to actually sink in. At least that's my experience. I don't know if you have a different take or different experience with that.
But no, you elaborated on quite a bit. My simplification would be is I don't know from my background is a protector.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly everything you just described. We have these things that we have learned, and they become such an automatic response
Mm-hmm.
that we actually assume they're true.
Mm-hmm.
We assume that's the way life is. And for some reason, we assume that a lot of other people feel the same way. This is just a truth for us.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't look at them. And what you just elaborated on was exactly my point, which is if we pause that automatic response and we start getting curious, and if you don't know where those automatic responses are, because I didn't, that's where that support starts becoming extremely valuable. And not only valuable in what it can do for you, but I like to think about it like when I learned how to drive like go-karts, race go-karts.
Mm-hmm.
Decent driver, really decent. Put me in the wet, didn't know how to drive in the wet on slicks.
Mm-hmm.
It was a learning curve.
Yeah.
Right. I struggled. I tried. I asked people what to do. I asked for tips. I asked for feedback. They gave me tips. All right, do this, try this, looking everywhere for an answer because I didn't know what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Once I actually had somebody start to actually go and teach me, and I actually got a little bit of a coach in that sense, whether it was a friend, it wasn't structured, but we went out and actually went coaching. My time frame of learning cut down like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was able to put together something in a relatively quick time where I'd struggled for like a year or two trying to put it together myself. So for me, that support was immensely invaluable in shortening the time frame and collapsing that time lane to the fact that I'm here with you 2 years later
Mm-hmm.
from like starting a really deep journey and having a lot of awareness to holy shit, I actually am on the other side that pain isn't even in my life much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Full blown remission. Most people don't know I have rheumatoid arthritis unless I start talking to them, and they assume it's like a normal arthritis, like, oh, your hand might hurt or something. It's like, you have no idea what it's taken to stand in front of you today. So that's where my passion comes from, because I know there's people out there in a similar spot that are hurting, don't want to hurt, or have tried a lot of stuff, are ready, or not quite ready to give up and still want more. And I am one of those people on that after commercial now. It's like before and after, like, oh, here's the after guy. And it's possible.
Yeah. Well, and to your point as well, is that's it's a continual journey. It's like you're over the first few mountains of being able to reclaim the life. And now you get to go on to the other mountains of what do I want to do with it?
And that to even have that as stepping stones is like wasn't even in my awareness before. If you would have asked me back before this, younger Bryan really hurting, he would have been, this was a far-fetched idea. So even having this is like, woo, won the race.
Yeah.
And to be here with like, not only not hurting, but a renewed sense of life and vigor and energy and passion that I had lost along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Because pain robs you of all that. It starts to rob you of your creativity. It starts to rob you of your thought process. It starts to rob you of your life, because the more energy you spend trying to hang on and trying to make sure that you can get through a day, the less you have for anything else. And it becomes very quickly about survival. Mm-hmm. And it says it in the name. Survival's not fun to live in. Nobody wants to live there. We're supposed to get in there and then get the hell out. Mm-hmm. Right. And down regulate and get back on to productivity in connection with yourself, not necessarily a doing, but a production of being.
Mm-hmm. How hard was that? I mean, talked about the living with the pain. Yeah. You gave us a little bit of a rundown of what your day would look like. How hard was it to transition into allowing yourself to just be, instead of like trying to make progress?
Big nail there, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Good point. I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah, because it's one of the tools that I see just applied in my life every day. And it's when I run into you, I run into anybody that started to look at their life and want to have a better relationship with it. Slowing down seems to be a huge, huge component of that, learning to slow down. Because at least in this culture that I've been raised in, production is rewarded, doing is rewarded, checking off the boxes. How many boxes did you check today? Cool. I did 20. You did 10. I'm obviously doing a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, some of that feels good. And I've noticed, come to look at the times that the checking the box felt good was when those boxes were in alignment, when it was something that lit me up and I felt good about doing, not just having to do for the sake of doing. So by all means, I don't imagine that you're saying that we should all just not do and just be.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a combination of that, of bringing the being into the doing, which changes the doing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Striking the balance between the two.
Yeah.
For you, what was that process like of trying to strike that balance? Like, did you find it really easy? Was it something that you had to really work towards? Is it something that you still struggle with?
It was a challenge. It took a long time. I run, if any of those people that know personality patterns, as a strategy to avoid things, I learned how to leave very early on in life. And I, looking back, spent most of my years checked out, didn't feel very connected and engaged with life. So getting here and then learn, so the doing became the way to replace all that.
Mm-hmm.
It was, it kept me busy, kept my mind going. But in that, slowing down became a real hard thing to get rid of that accomplishment feeling. I tried on a bunch of new tools because, again, I was in a spot that I knew everything I did before didn't work. So I was readily available to open up to trying things that just didn't make sense. Like I hadn't journaled much before this program. I hadn't sat and just in silence or with meditation or tried to just sit and calm and let things be what they are for a few minutes, just to be with me. When I got frustrated, there was a lot of mental engagement, or if you had an emotion come up previously, there'd be so much mental engagement and judgment and criticism that it stayed around for days, for weeks, lingering, just going over thought loops over and over and over again. I imagine you understand that.
Yeah. And for you too, like I know for me, this is very true. But for you, when you got into those, especially when you had a feeling, an emotion, even a physical sensation that wasn't pain, did you find that you went to a very like analytical, intellectual space to try to like wrap your brain around it rather than just to like sit with it and experience it?
I believe the brain activity at that point would be trying to understand what's going on. Because it was just so used to being on, it wasn't stopping. So at first it just refocused a little bit to like, oh, instead of the thought loop, let's start focusing on the sensation, like give it something to occupy itself with. Like, oh, you feel that welling up in your chest. Like, yes, that is an emotion, but can you feel the physical sensations? So that started to bridge a little gap and give the brain something to focus on and start to bridge the gap to bringing the focus to me.
Yeah.
And this was the benefits of support. They helped me find those little ways. Because if you asked me to sit down at first and say, spend 5 minutes with yourself, like that's just going to be a mental exercise.
Yeah. I'm just going to like mentally go through my to-do list for the rest of the day. Yeah. Some little nugget there that I wanted to scratch into because this is always, I find this incredibly fascinating. You talked about, feeling something well up in your chest and like sitting with that and getting connected into that. Did you find that as you were able to connect into those feelings, emotions, and sensations, that gave you a different lens to when you did view when you were experiencing pain, that you viewed it in a different way?
Absolutely. That process, wasn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing, continuous practice of being with those sensations. And yeah, it changed being with everything that came up, because it started to open a dimension rather than just being this flat, one-dimensional kind of thing that I had previously known, which is it's an emotion. This has this uncomfortable thing, or anger, or depression, or frustration, happiness. I'd love to say all the positive stuff, but those were kind of muted at that time. They had definitely gotten very quiet. It started to change all of that. So instead of rushing to a story and rushing to just indulging the emotion that was coming up, it started to slow that process down, tying that slowing into what we were talking about earlier. And it started to slow that down for me to start looking beyond just that one dimension and open it up to more, which honestly, now that I'm talking about it, gave me probably the biggest tool, as the intro to the biggest tool that has led me here, which is curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And curiosity leads over knowing. You start being more open.
Mm-hmm. How, you talked about that being the tool that has served you the best so far. Like with you and your rheumatoid arthritis and your experience with pain, like how has curiosity push you forward, or like how do you use curiosity for yourself?
Curiosity, like we just said, started off kind of like that. It started to open the door because, like, what if, or what does this feel like? If there is more than this emotion that I'm experiencing that I'm used to, and now that somebody's helped support me in finding a way to look for more, what is there? Mm-hmm. So it opened the door, instead of to being stuck in one ball of familiarity of pain that I was in, and started to open the door to, like, it sounds really woo-woo, to being with, the pain, what the sensations that came up. But it started to open the door, like, what happens with this? If that's possible, okay. And eventually that curiosity led to less judgment. It started to quiet that voice of, figure it out, it has to be this way or that way. You don't know what you're doing, because now we're in uncharted waters and unknown territory. Curiosity allowed that to bring some idea of adventure and safety, rather than the fear of, I don't know what the hell we're doing. Mm-hmm. And I'll take that even farther. Now, curiosity, coming from somebody who has to have a plan, figure it all out, growing up, life is an experiment. What happens if? What happens when? For anything that I do. Mm-hmm. Now it's what happens when I did that. Oh, that's what happens when I said that response from that person. Okay. No judgment, no critical inner critic screaming at me. Mm-hmm. It's, that's what happens. Wasn't my intention. Now that I got feedback, I can clarify and do it again to get closer to what I wanted or intended. And in that, maybe something comes up that I didn't expect. And now I don't have an end goal to get to, where I'm not being derailed and I can't appreciate it. I can actually be flexible enough to go with what feels good and where it leads me.
It's really cool. I like, from my own perspective, I work with some folks who do experience physical pain, and we use corrective exercise to help mitigate and manage some of that. And I find it interesting when I work with folks like that, and looking back at, the pre-PCS work, Bryan, how curious were you when you were experiencing pain? How curious were you about it?
How do you stop it?
And that was the only curiosity.
That was the only curiosity, is how do I get my questions of how and what's going to bring this to stop? How do I not exist in pain anymore? Were about the only other thoughts that were occupied outside of hurting for me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been lucky enough to not have to live with chronic pain, but like even acute pain, having similar experiences of like, you throw your back out for a week and you're like, well, I'd just like to be able to get in and out of my bed normally. It's like, wow, what's going to get me forward? And, like, it's been interesting, on my own journey of being able to, in a similar way, of get curious about sensations in my body as well, of like, hey, I'm experiencing this, rather than just give it the black and white of, hey, my left hamstring feels really tight today. What's actually going on there? Is it actually the hamstring? Am I feeling something somewhere else? Have I sat really funny for a while? Like, did I sleep in a different position? Get curious.
Or even let the mind, right? Where it's like, oh, what did I do? What's wrong with this? How does this, what can I fix on this? Because it shouldn't be this way.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, it's actually taken a different turn rather than just fix. Like, let's actually get curious about the sensation itself. Like, does this feel like muscle tension? Does this feel like a lack of activity types of tension or disuse? Like a lack of blood flow? Does this feel like I've overused? Like, what's actually going on, rather than, oh, left hamstring feels weird or feels quote unquote tight. Getting curious about those sensations for me has been a big change. And does that resonate with like how you've approached some of that curiosity for yourself?
It is now, and you're tying together a few things that are really, really interesting, because we've been talking about rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease, which, and for me, is hilariously funny that we call it an autoimmune disease because it's the body attacking itself.
Mm-hmm.
If I was just to simply take that to my life and wonder, like, how did I get rheumatoid arthritis? I would have to say that would be the cause. I was attacking myself on some level all the time, holding myself to a higher standard, not accepting who I was, but wanting whatever society, my father, my parents, the teachers, whoever I grew up and thought was, the way to be in our culture was successful. I was beating myself up constantly for anything that didn't fit into that or get a good response from friends or people, classmates. So there was a constant, I know for me, there was a constant level of attack on my system. So it's not a surprise. And I just laugh because attacking itself. What have I been doing? Oh, so as I've learned to not attack myself and love myself when I stopped attacking, my body started getting better. Imagine that. But that also ties into injury. We don't have to go down to being the body, to a disease. We can go to, oh, I got an injury. We are usually in such a hurry in the society to get back to life that, yes, physically the body can do something again. Did it actually heal and get the information fully out of that area and allow that area to reconnect and start to function and allow nerve information, allow blood flow, allow tissue to function the way it used to? Or are we just altering it slightly and thereby slightly kind of losing a little bit inside of that alteration?
Or
and you tie that.
Looking at, like, we talked about, we've talked about with a few other folks that have been on the show as well, of like the stories around it. You injured yourself doing something. Now, every time you go to do that something, whether you're actively thinking about it or not, there's still something in the back of your mind going, hey, are we going to hurt ourselves again? Hey, last time we did this, or we remember when we did this another time and it hurt. And so you get those vestiges of like preemptive pain that come in. And unless we deal with that side of things, it could always be coming up for you. Right.
And you brought up TRE earlier. And this seems like a good point to kind of tie this back in. For those that don't know, TRE is a modality for tension and trauma releasing exercises, which is a set of gentle stretches that help you tap into your nervous systems. And we find that we have an automatic tremor mechanism. We see this in the wild all the time where animals will shake and downregulate, and it's a process of bringing the nervous system out of survival back into parasympathetic state. I got to discover that medicine and that modality very much into my healing journey, and it's been amazingly impactful. I imagine if I would have found that early on, the impact would have been just as attractive, because that modality is very interesting, because we've been talking about story work and we've been talking about protection mechanisms and like, I don't know, and these things that we dive into. And I imagine there's people with injuries and stuff that doesn't resonate. It's woo-woo. We don't want to deal with emotions. We don't want to deal with that idea that all that stuff we're throwing out there. It's very foo-foo, right?
We want it as the binary of hurt, not hurt.
Yeah, I want to get better. I want to get back on my life. And that's great. That's a total worthwhile and, wonderful thing. And if that's what you're looking for, I love TRE because it doesn't involve having to figure things out. It actually is a modality that requires you to just be present, to stop actually thinking and letting the story come up, to not have to figure your story out, but just start showing up and letting your body use that wisdom we were saying, that stuff it already does know how to do, to learn how to be open enough to start hearing that again, and bridge that disconnect back with the body in a very present sense, without having to dive through a bunch of layers of story and emotion and figure it out. Trust the body, and it will actually bring it up and let it move and do its thing all on its own, if you learn how to talk to it and let it be.
Yeah. And like I mentioned before, for most folks out in the world, just that concept is nearly foreign to them. The just being with your body.
Yeah, I would imagine that a lot of people who have chronic pain, who have had injuries where they still have flare-ups, twinges, things that they've learned to just be like, it's just that old injury. It's what it is.
I got that trick knee or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. That low back issue. It's only when I do this thing. So we've come to kind of embrace that. That's just part of our truth now. I imagine most people have not experienced something where they get to sit down or lay down and actually just spend a little time with themselves with no other pressure, but to go, hey, what does my body, what does my nervous system, what does everything that's going on, if I shut off the outside world for a few minutes and just learn to start refocusing that attention there, what's going on there? Right? And that just doesn't happen that much. And the power that is in that is just astonishing to me. It really is, especially when you have somebody support to kind of give that reflection to keep you there, because it's easy to check out. Our mind takes over and gets us somewhere else. We start thinking about what we should be doing, our to-do list, when we start running through the list and we're like, hey, I was there with myself. Were you?
Maybe on
the temperature on your skin? Yeah.
On an intellectual level, you were there, yes. And we're also there all the time.
Yeah. So just bringing that into the body has been like a very key step.
It's awesome. Talking more, since we're on the path. What has your introduction of TRE into becoming a practitioner? What's that path look like for you? Paint us the picture.
You mean like how it went for me, or
or like how did you get introduced? Like, tell us the story.
Okay. Luckily, again, training camp. Great home base. Amazing work. I learned, got introduced to TRE through one of the retreats in a group setting, and went home. I played with it a little bit. Had some neat interactions. It was neat to learn this new language, because you tremor, you wiggle a little bit. Sometimes your body wants to unwind, like myofascially, and move and express. And there's generally a sense of calm and peaceful and ease that comes with that work, even in 15 minutes. It's kind of astonishing. It was when I actually got curious enough to follow the call to pursue this more for myself, and started learning how to be a provider. When the one-on-one experience came and somebody actually really started holding that space for me, that's when the depth of that work really started to open up, and really started to understand the power of just being present. And in that sense, we start to open ourselves to all the information, those pulses, those inputs. I mean, to get a little woo, I believe we are beings of pulsation. We vibrate and pulse and have a unique pulsation. And that tremor is that sign. It is that bit of life that comes through us. Everything that ties us together goes through our nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
All the emotions, all the mental, the physical, the biological, the physiological, all of that stuff has to pulse through the nervous system. So if that is possible, then why aren't we pulsating in a nice, unified, beautiful kind of expression of our life? Because things get hung up.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I was able to hold that space, it was able to start receiving some of those emotions more as information. Some of those sensations or stories would just start to kind of pass by my awareness as I was in that space of watching some vibration inside my body move from my hip up to my shoulders and then all of a sudden out my throat. And like, oh, I can remember that little bit or this story that came up, and it just goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing to do that, to find a continued renewed depth in this. That, again, what fascinated me was we didn't have to go through the emotional. I've been doing emotional, inner child shadow work, limited belief work, all that stuff, pretty intense work for quite a while. And to have something that was just like, here's how you actually are and exist kind of in this space without having to figure anything out. Just keep showing up and trying to keep yourself present. And that started to bring a lot more presence into my life. That slowness started to become more regular for me, because it was starting to look for the depth and the communication and what was going on every moment, rather than just rushing to fill it in with the mental story.
Yeah.
I know that's a lot, so.
No, that's all good. That's all good. Something that I'd like to dive further into, if you're open, is we've talked about your experience with your rheumatoid arthritis and living with pain, and you just talked about how you're able to bring that presence into your life. So outside of the pain and the prescribed condition, how has that added presence improved your life? What other ways has it improved your life?
Funny, we just want to actually stop hurting. And then all of a sudden, once we start changing a few things, we realize that everything is connected. And all of a sudden we're showing up, because you can't let go of something like a pain or a belief or an old personality and not move and be different. Mm-hmm. You have to exist from a new place. And every time I've been showing up with my nervous system, I come back a new person, because those same pathways are not the same anymore. They're expanded. Showing up to presence has allowed me to bring that slowness that we talked about into, or at least catch myself when that slowness disappears, and to realize I'm rushing, and to realize that I have a choice about where I place my attention and my energy. And take it back to like Bryan without any of this self-development. The choices, like how to succeed, how to get ahead, how do I pay my bills, how, do I find a partner, where do I go, what food do I eat, how do I live? That's living. Now is, how do I feel? What do I really want? What do I need? What is all of me had to say about this today? Oh, do I feel a little run down and I actually need to nurture myself and take a break, rather than the plan was today to show up and go, 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 and realize that that's not where I'm at, and to be able to modify and realize that previous Bryan would have been really just pushed ahead. Nope, we got plans. We're doing this. Doesn't matter how you feel, and be miserable the whole day. And then wonder why the next day feels like shit. And then wonder why it just is always this way.
It's now it's cumulative effect of.
Yeah. So now
terrible
I realize,
day after terrible day.
That.
Yeah.
I don't feel that. I don't want to do that today. I want to go, I actually need some rest. And I actually give myself permission to fully rest, rather than go sit on the couch and feel guilty about what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Or go to the bed and just lay down for an hour and go, I just need quiet, silence, and give myself that permission. I come back and all of a sudden I'm ready to do, and it's easy. And things get out of the way without much effort. That's just one example. And that just goes to relationships, my relationships with my family, with people in my life, people that I meet like you, deeper, even quicker. You and I got to spend 4 or 5 days together, and great bond. Right.
Yeah.
At least so for me, Jeremy.
No, it's
um,
great
but even
connections
with
all
all the
around.
people there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that happens, and that wouldn't have happened for me at 20, at 25 or 30. It would have been a lot of judgment about what type of relationship that should be, how I should show up, what am I doing? And so everything is shifted.
Or externalizing your self judgment onto other people of like, well, they're this type of person. There's no way I would be interested in them, or vice versa. And
Yeah. You already know people before you've even met them, right? You
yeah,
already read them, know them, judged them, because you're judging yourself all the time.
yes, I'm actually working through a book right now. Covers a lot of that. They haven't necessarily gotten into the projection of self judgment onto others, but it's very much the like looking at what your interactions and what are your first types of impressions of people, and where is it accurate and where is it not accurate. So there's interesting stuff there, but like very much so when we are able to slow down, we're able to connect to ourselves much more authentically, that we were able to show up and have conversations with people without waiting for like our turn to talk.
And not to say that I don't notice my judging still. I'll still show up and be like, oh, but I'll catch it.
Yeah.
And the fun thing is then I get to go over and actually make the connection and laugh at that part of myself that had some judgment to realize like they were completely off or they're completely on, but it was still a matter of we're going to close the gap from imagination to reality. And we're going to not invest in that story.
Yeah.
Right. We get to notice it and be like, oh, part of me actually thinks that about that person. Let's go figure it out. Let's go have some fun.
Or like, can we confirm or deny it? You know, I talked to a group of high school kids last week, and we talked about words and breathing and some of these basic level mindfulness practices. And the thing that I led with the group was that we're going to share some things. If you're afraid of judgment, don't worry. I'm judging you. We're all judging you. Judging can also be positive. And when we say no judgment, we really mean we're avoiding negative judgment. And so it's like, can I bring that positive judgment aspect into it more? Rather than saying no judgment, I would say more positive judgment.
I like that. I feel that that's a good shifting point. For me, I even have taken that a step farther, and this all goes to who we're talking to and where they're at along their journey. But noticing even if you do have that judgment comes up, realizing it's yours.
Just another story.
Whatever it is, whether you want to label it, good or bad, notice you had this response. Look beyond that. If you can catch it, if you're at a point that you can notice that, the next step, you catch it and still just hold this person in value to realize like they are showing up the best they can, whether you agree, disagree, or have some opinion about it. Can you accept just who they are and that's them? Or do you need them to be a better person or a different person to make you more comfortable? But you get to notice those things. And again, nice little way to start checking in with what we hold to be true. Yeah. All these little things that show up that I had no idea about because it's just the way we live life, right?
We like, I don't know if this is true for you, but like very much in my experience growing up and getting into the world is that it felt like there was this, you had all of your different selves, your professional self, your school self, your self with your friends, yourself with your family, and you're looking to compartmentalize these as much as possible. And you're looking to clock in on this identity, clock out, clock in, clock out, punch, punch, punch. And there's no interweaving or interconnectedness unless you sit and contemplate it. It's like, all right, I'm going passively from one to the next, and I just switched to that next identity. Switch. And I don't know if that's something that makes any sense to you or that something that you've experienced as well.
And there's an interesting thing in there that you bring up because we do put on different hats all the time, right? We do show up at our job and we get to fill a different role than we do get to fill at home. or you get to feel with our friends. And while those may require a different energy, it's beautiful to be able to do that seamlessly and be able to try on different hats. And I think the beauty in that for me is the awareness that you're trying on a hat, that it's not a you.
Mm-hmm.
I am not the person at work like, oh, this is the personality or what I put on at work, which leaves it free to change.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond that, I have found it a lot easier even just to start bringing more of you to all of those hats.
Mm-hmm.
It gets to be just more cohesion, more of you through all of your day, and you get to be more of you as you show up for roles.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to explore maybe some aspects in this role that aren't available to explore in other roles. And that's the joy of showing up like, oh, I get to put this hat on. And today I get to explore how to figure out this stuff on the computer and make that business run a little better and do my work hat.
Mm-hmm.
And at home, I get to set that part down. I get to figure out how to dive in and be a little more present with the communication with the family. But I'm still bringing that essence of me. I'm still bringing in integrity. I'm not pretending or answering the question at work differently than I would answer it home.
Mm-hmm.
Just happens to be a different subject matter.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Like as you've done this, have you noticed a major difference in like how people interact with you or how people engage with that?
Yeah. Quit my job that I had for 10 to 12 years.
All right.
I
Can be a big
lost
change.
a lot of I lost. It wasn't, I was killing myself at a job because I like performance, parts of the job I liked, but I was miserable going.
Mm-hmm.
And it just got very clear. The more I got time for myself, the more I realized how unhappy and how unsatisfied I was and where stress was coming from. And that was that job. Not that, I mind working, but I wasn't happy and it was killing me. But I've lost friends. People went away, people that don't support me, people that I tried to make friends and just to fill my time with that weren't pulling me up and weren't on pulling themselves up. I stopped wasting energy on things that weren't serving me. I found that people that do show up are people I respect now, people I look up to. The people I meet are genuine. They have, different quality of people all the way around. It's shifted my social life completely and what's important in my heart. Like my heart is more comfortable expressing what it really likes and what lights it up. And it's less concerned about spending the time with things that don't do it.
Mm-hmm. That's super cool. We talked a lot about the journey that you've been on and some of the areas there. What other kind of things do you like to do? We talked about being able to reclaim your life from the pain events. So what types of things do you enjoy doing?
Yeah. And remember, walking was a problem for a while. Driving and sitting in a car, so traveling anywhere was questionable. Sleeping in unfamiliar beds, not having enough pillows or comfort. So that world was very small. I stopped piercing, which is something I love to do. I stopped doing a lot of modifications. Now I ride mountain bikes. I ride mountain bikes downhill and get out. I live in Washington State, which is great for that, but it's rough. It's rooty. It's rocky. It's hard on the body, the joints. And I still have some pains from damage done, but to be on a bike and pedal and go out and ride and do, 10 to 15 miles, 2,000 to 4,000 feet of elevation, to drive go-karts that are really rough and abusive on hard seats and being on the body, to traveling, hiking, steel mace, working out, actively working out, stuff that I can do pretty much every day. I do have, like I said, I do have some pains. I'm not going to say that life is perfect and I'm 100%. I'm 50 years old, but I am typically doing more and more active than a lot of people I know my age.
Yeah. Probably even more than some people who are 20, 30 years younger than you.
I ride with a lot of people that are younger. I hang out with a lot of people actively that are younger. And they're usually surprised when they hear my age.
Yeah.
Never mind the damage. They're astonished that I can actually say it feels a little discrediting to rheumatoid arthritis because when people look at me like, oh, all right, it must not be that big of a deal. Like it's
Yeah.
just arthritis. Yeah, I wish it was. And it is for me, but it's taken work.
Mm-hmm. And that it's true for you now rather than like what it was.
Yeah. Like our retreat would have been challenging for me to get through physically without being in a lot of pain. Just to walk, being on bare floors, the dancing, the up and down, the being outside, all of those things, even just simple things, being in, the beds and different pillows and all those experiences, the freedom to just go out of my house how I want, to travel if I want to.
I'm sure the travel alone, the distance would have been that would have already set you behind. Yeah. In the past, where you're like, well, I need a week to acclimate.
Right. Yeah. It was like an old man. It really was.
Yeah. It's awesome. That's amazing to hear, like the journey that you've been on and the things that you're able to do now. And like, yeah, it excites me to see you out in the world.
Thank you, buddy. I will say, even on top of the things that I can do, because that gets to be easily quantifiable, the thing that really means so much more to me than that is the fact that I don't have that weight on my shoulders anymore. The fact that life is possible and that I can have hope and that it's actually realistic. Like, that anything is possible. Like that lifting of a weight off somebody's shoulders who's carried around that kind of a lifestyle or limitation for that long. Yeah, they enjoy doing things, but it's that expression that they're just not bound anymore. That freedom that comes with that is just something that is only really recognizable by people who have come back from something. Even if it's a small injury, even if, you broke your leg and you got back to playing your sport really well, that feeling of being there and knowing you can do that again is more than just being able to be there. It's that wholeness, that cohesion, that being open and letting life flow through you is just an incredible feeling. I cannot express that enough. And that is exactly why I share what I do with people, because freedom means everything. And that feeling of freedom is, pretty incredible when you rediscover it.
Absolutely is. With that, is there anything in particular that you would like to bring forward to the audience? Anything that you'd like to promote?
Have a lot going on right now. We're in the process of putting out some courses and getting that more streamlined and effectively released. In the meantime, I've been very fortunate to have a lot of referrals and people. I'm one of those little mystery kind of guys that you find through a friend. So I'm working on making that more accessible, but you got my details in the show links. So for contacting information that way, I am facilitating at the Soul Unleashed retreat in Bingen, Washington. There's a link for that as well. That's going to be February 17th through the 19th. That's going to be a pretty amazing weekend. Nice bit of connection in like 3 days to really dive deep. Cool. Have a few lives coming up on that. So if you want to learn a little bit more, we can tune in to that. My Instagram will have that. And new courses coming out, but if that's something that interests you, I'm definitely contactable through all those means, and happy to share.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bryan, for being on this episode of the Weird and Strong podcast. I greatly appreciate you taking the time to sit and talk with me, and it was amazing to get to reconnect with you after a few weeks.
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you so much for having me on. Great time, brother. So happy to be here. Thanks so much.
And thank you all for listening to this episode of the Weird and Strong podcast. As always, if you love what you're hearing or you like what you're hearing, share us with your friends. Friends always love to share with friends. Even better, like us, subscribe, leave us a comment, leave us a rating on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. And until next time, we'll see you on the weird side.